Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our mission here is pretty simple, really. We take a whole stack of sources, articles, biographies, research papers, archive notes, you name it, and we distill them down.
We do the digging so that you, our listener, can get the full picture.
Exactly. You get the surprising details, the crucial context, and you get to be genuinely well-informed without, having to drown in all the information yourself.
And today, we are exploring a life that is, in so many ways, the definitive study of the rise and the spectacular fall of 20th century American televangelism.
We are diving deep into the sources on Jimmy Swaggart, pastor, media mogul, gospel artist. He was a figure whose massive global influence was, at the end of the day, completely overshadowed by two of the most dramatic public scandals in modern religious history.
It's a fascinating story. Swaggart, who lived from 1935 all the way to 2025, rose from this just astonishing rural poverty to become the face of faith for millions.
And in the 1980s, he was at the absolute peak. His crusades were drawing massive crowds.
Unbelievable crowds. And the source material we have maps out this extraordinary journey. You see the relentless building of an empire that, at its height, was reportedly worth a staggering $150 million annually.
And then you see the sudden, very public self-destruction that followed.
What's so compelling about Swaggart is the sheer scale of the extremes. The influence was just immense, but the depth of the scandals was equally profound.
It was a perfect storm, really.
A perfect storm of religious, financial, and even, as we'll see, political chaos. Our sources trace his musical and religious roots in Louisiana, the very strategic development of his television dominance, some surprising international entanglements.
And of course, the dual controversies that fundamentally restructured the entire landscape of American religious broadcasting.
It really did.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We need to understand the mechanics here. How did a man born into such poverty build an empire of this magnitude? And maybe more importantly, what happens when that empire collapses? Not once, but twice, forcing him to choose between accountability to his denomination and absolute personal autonomy.
And that choice, as we're going to see, that specific choice, became the very definition of his legacy.
To really grasp the complexity of Jimmy Swaggart, you absolutely have to start at the source.
You could go back.
Back to Faraday, Louisiana, 1935. He was born Jimmy Lee Swaggart to Willie Leon, who was known as Son Swaggart, a man who, he juggled being a sharecropper, a fiddle player, and a Pentecostal preacher.
All at the same time. And his mother, Minnie Bell. The sources really emphasize that Faraday in the 1930s and 40s was this intense, often rough environment.
This wasn't just some sleepy rural town.
Not at all. It was a deeply interconnected, you could almost say tribal community.
Yeah.
The family network was exceptionally tight. I mean, to give you an idea, Swaggart's own parents were related by marriage.
How so?
His maternal uncle had married a sister of Swaggart's mother. So it was this very insular world where music, extreme poverty, and this fervent, unyielding faith were really the dominant cultural forces.
And what immediately stands out to anyone looking at his background is that family tree. It's just split right down the middle, isn't it, between the sacred and the secular?
Oh, absolutely. He was first cousin to two titans who helped define 20th century American music.
First, the wild rockabilly pioneer, Jerry Lee Lewis.
The Killer, yeah. And on the other side, the smooth country music star, Mickey Gilley.
It's almost unbelievable, that convergence of talent born out of that one single small community.
It really is.
Yeah.
And you have to imagine the pressure and the competing paths that presented to a young, talented kid who could both play music and preach.
That juxtaposition, the Holy Spirit and the honky-tonk piano.
That was a lifelong tension point for Swaggart. He grew up seeing both extreme faith and extreme fame played out right in front of him by his closest relatives.
And all of this was set against a backdrop of truly crushing poverty. The sources detail the immense struggles he faced in the 1950s after he married Frances Anderson in 1952.
And they had their son, Donnie, very early on.
Right. And the data we have shows they were trying to survive on about $30 a week.
$30 a week. And it's important to put that in context. While it sounds like nothing now, even when you adjust for inflation, the sources note this only translates to about $340 in modern money.
So they were living perpetually below the poverty line.
Constantly, moving all the time. The documents confirm they were living hand to mouth, moving between church basements, staying temporarily in pastors' homes, cheap motels. He wasn't parachuted into fame.
Not at all.
He spent a decade in the grueling, itinerant ministry trenches of rural Louisiana and the American South. preaching out of what seems to be sheer desperation and, real commitment.
Which makes the next detail from the source material so absolutely crucial. This is the moment. This is what defined his entire career trajectory.
The crossroads.
Exactly. While he was struggling on that $30 a week, he gets approached by the legendary Sun Records producer, Sam Phillips.
The man himself. The source material highlights this as a critical, almost unbelievable moment of choice. Phillips, the man who discovered Elvis and Johnny Cash, the man who basically defined early rock and roll, he was looking to expand his empire.
And he wanted to get into gospel.
Right. He wanted to launch a dedicated gospel line, probably to compete with the huge market shares that RCA Victor and Columbia Records had. And he specifically wanted Jimmy Swaggart to be his first gospel artist.
And the financial reality hanging over this decision is it's almost painful to think about.
It is, because at this exact time, his cousin, Jerry Lee Lewis, was reportedly pulling in a staggering $20,000
per week.
So the Sun Records offer didn't just represent success. It represented an immediate escape from destitution. It was a chance to leap from a $30 weekly income to potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars a year.
An absolute life-changing amount of money.
Yet the sources are completely definitive on this. Swaggart turned Sam Phillips down, flat. He stated very clearly that he was called to preach the gospel.
And this initial refusal, it underscores a point we have to keep in our minds through this whole analysis.
It's foundational.
At his core, at the beginning, Swaggart prioritized his spiritual calling over commercial music success. He actively rejected the lure of the booming secular entertainment industry that had completely consumed his cousins.
It shows a radical, almost sacrificial commitment, at least initially.
That one decision really does set the table for his entire subsequent life. He chose the hard path. The sources confirm he began his full-time evangelistic work in 1955.
And he launched his ministry, literally, from a donated flatbed trailer.
A flatbed trailer.
That was his first pulpit. He slowly built his following through these old-fashioned revival meetings, earning his credentials step by painful step.
And that institutional progress, it was measurable. He gets ordained by the Assemblies of God, which is the largest Pentecostal denomination in the world in 1961.
And by the late 1960s, he'd established his home base, the Family Worship Center in Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
And that church, it became district affiliated with the Assemblies of God. That gave him a stable institutional platform.
A platform from which to launch his true ambitions. The foundation was laid. Now he just needed a much, much bigger stage.
The leap from a local church in Baton Rouge and a flatbed trailer to a national empire, well, it requires an understanding of media that was truly innovative for the 1970s.
This is the moment. This is where Swaggart shifted his identity from just a revivalist to a genuine media mogul.
The crucial turning point was 1971.
Yes. He understood that mass media was the absolute key to scaling the ministry, and he took this multi-pronged approach. He started pretty modestly with a weekly 30-minute Jimmy Swaggart telecast on local Baton Rouge stations.
But at the same time, he did something else.
He did. He acquired WLUX, a local AM radio station. He immediately rebranded it. It eventually became WPFC. And he used it to play a mix of black gospel, southern gospel, and inspirational music.
Now that is a sophisticated strategy. It's not just buying airtime.
No. It's buying the means of production and distribution.
Yeah.
He controlled the content going out on multiple channels right from the start.
And the sources show that by 1975, the momentum was just unstoppable. The television ministry expanded nationally.
And television rapidly cemented itself as his primary and by far his most powerful form for preaching.
By 1978, the popularity was so massive that the weekly telecast was expanded
to a full hour. And this growth, it created a virtuous cycle. More airtime meant more viewers, which meant more donations, which in turn funded even more airtime.
Let's talk about the financial mechanics of that. That $150 million operation, a figure we have from sources describing his pre-scandal revenue, that was built primarily on viewer donations, right?
Almost entirely. The revenue model was straightforward but incredibly effective. It relied on the power of direct response marketing tailored for a religious audience.
So appeals on the show itself.
Directly on the telecasts. Swaggart would make an appeal during his show asking viewers to support the ministry through, say, regular monthly pledges or one-time gifts.
And often in exchange for something.
Oh, yes. Often in exchange for Bibles, his study guides, or his music. The sources confirm this was a highly professional operation. They had sophisticated P.O. box systems, a robust merchandise arm for books, commentaries, records.
It was a massive nonprofit financial machine.
and its visibility reached its zenith around the early 1980s. In 1980, he added a daily weekday broadcast, a study in the Word, which focused on Bible instruction.
So now he's on 5 days a week, plus his big hour-long weekend service.
Exactly. And by 1983, the numbers are truly astonishing. The telecast was being broadcast by more than 250 television stations nationwide.
In a pre-internet age, that's
Yeah.
true cultural saturation.
He was a permanent, non-negotiable fixture in American religious life.
And he wasn't just preaching, he was institutionalizing his particular brand of Pentecostalism. The sources really emphasize the academic and physical expansion that happened alongside the media growth.
Absolutely. In the autumn of 1984, he opened the Jimmy Swaggart Bible College, or JSBC.
Which initially offered a range of degrees, right? Not just theology.
Correct. Education, communications. He was creating his own workforce and, more importantly, ensuring theological conformity with his specific views.
The intellectual output was equally massive.
Oh, incredible. Swaggart wrote about 50 Christian books for his ministry. And critically, he authored the Expositor's Study Bible, 13 detailed study guides, and 38 comprehensive commentaries.
So this wasn't passive consumption for his audience.
Not at all. He was creating the entire curriculum and the literary foundation for his global following. And it was all interpreted through his specific theological lens.
We have to circle back to the central contradiction of his career, which is the music.
Yes.
The sources are clear. He rejected Sam Phillips early on, but he never rejected music itself. In fact, he embraced gospel music and became immensely successful.
He sold over 15 million records worldwide as a gospel artist.
It's the ultimate irony, isn't it?
It really is. He achieved the massive commercial success he initially sacrificed, but he did it through a vehicle that was deemed holy.
And that success was cemented, I believe, when he received a Grammy Award nomination in 1981.
That's right, for Best Gospel Performance, traditional, for his album Worship.
And here's where that contradiction becomes really acute. The sources note this, and it's something we have to highlight. How can a man who is a Grammy-nominated, multi-million-selling recording artist simultaneously publish a book titled Religious Rock and Roll? A wolf in sheep's clothing?
He published that in 1985.
Right. I mean, that sounds like a fundamental hypocrisy built right into the structure of his business model.
Well, it's more than just hypocrisy. It's a strategic effort to define boundaries that favor his product while condemning his cousin's product.
So he's drawing a line in the sand.
A very clear line. The sources show Swaggart positioned himself as the standard bearer for traditional conservative Christian music while actively attacking the emerging contemporary Christian music scene, often labeling it rock and roll for its secular influences.
So he was creating a distinction that validated his own commercial success.
Exactly.
Yeah.
While allowing him to maintain the moral high ground and claim a separation from the world of, say, Jerry Lee Lewis. His ministry was the media empire, and that empire necessitated massive commercial transactions, even as he preached against worldliness.
Now, before we turn to the domestic moral scandals, which are what most people remember, we need to integrate a crucial and often overlooked dimension of his ministry.
Yes, it's deep and very controversial. Entanglement in international politics and armed conflict, specifically in Southern Africa.
This shows just how global that $150 million influence really was.
It does. We're moving far beyond the typical scope of American televangelism here. We're talking about the Mozambican Civil War in the 1980s.
So what exactly was the nature of Swaggart Ministries' involvement with this group, Renamo?
The sources we have indicate that throughout the 1980s, Swaggart Ministries was one of several influential American evangelical organizations that actively promoted the Mozambican National Resistance, or Renamo.
And this was a movement engaged in a protracted, 15-year civil war?
A 15-year civil war against the socialist government of Mozambique. And it's critical to note that Renamo was backed extensively by the apartheid regime of South Africa.
And the sources we have connect Swaggart to a deeply problematic group. We need to be very clear about the context here. Renamo was not just a political opposition group.
No, not by a long shot. It was widely accused of committing systematic, large-scale war crimes. The gravity of this support has to be understood.
So what are we talking about specifically?
Impartial human rights groups and international organizations documented that Renamo's tactics included the systematic targeting of civilians, widespread kidnapping, forced labor, the destruction of infrastructure like hospitals and schools,
And mass murder.
and mass murder. So by supporting Renamo, Swaggart Ministries was effectively providing aid and publicity to a group accused of brutalizing the very civilian population it claimed it wanted to liberate.
And the sources provide a staggering piece of physical evidence that connects the ministry directly to the conflict zone.
Yes, this is incredible. In September 1985, government forces captured the main Renamo headquarters, a place known as Casa Banana.
And inside the camp.
Inside the camp, they found piles of Swaggart's literature, specifically his 1982 publication, How to Receive the Baptism in the Holy Spirit, which had been translated into Portuguese.
That is genuinely unsettling. It suggests that his ministry's publications were being used as part of the, I don't know, the ideological or propaganda structure inside a brutal rebel base.
Not just as a tool for personal salvation. And the accusations extended far beyond just literature. Throughout this period, Swaggart Ministries was repeatedly accused of providing both funding and material support.
And how was that support allegedly being delivered?
The sources detail claims that it was channeled indirectly, sometimes working through an intermediary organization called Shekinah Ministries.
And these allegations surfaced prominently during a trial, correct?
That's right. The 1988 trial of an Australian missionary named Ian Gray, who was coordinating a lot of the private aid for Renamo.
So the narrative here is key. We have the absolute peak of his domestic fame, built on a message of moral purity and gospel dissemination.
Happening at the exact same time as accusations that his global financial resources were supporting a military organization accused of war crimes, all in the name of anti-communism.
Cold War politics must have played a significant role.
A huge role. The sources highlight that for many American evangelicals, they often viewed these conflicts through a purely ideological lens, supporting any group fighting against a communist or socialist regime, regardless of that group's methods.
And Swaggart's financial muscle made him an extremely powerful player in that kind of shadow diplomacy.
Absolutely. And it's crucial to note that this involvement continued even after his first public scandal. In 1991, Covert Action magazine and the government of Zimbabwe both accused Swaggart Ministries of continuing to funnel funds and support to Renamo.
So even as his domestic reputation was imploding,
the international infrastructure of his ministry remained committed to this highly political and controversial cause. It confirms that his empire had tentacles reaching far beyond Baton Rouge.
And those tentacles were connected to massive geopolitical conflicts that involved immense human suffering.
So what this all means, in the context of the moral collapse that was about to define his career, is that the stakes were far higher than just a man cheating on his wife.
It's so much bigger than that. We have this powerful media empire entangled in political accusations of supporting atrocities, all while the domestic crisis, the part the American media focused on, was rapidly escalating.
The moral failure when it came wasn't isolated. It was part of a much larger global structure of power and influence.
The eventual public downfall of Jimmy Swaggart provides, well, a very clear narrative lesson in the price of public judgment.
It really does. And our sources confirm that the 1988 scandal was not just a random exposure. It was a carefully calculated act of revenge that originated from within the same religious circle he operated in.
Let's lay out the context here, because this goes back to 1986, 2 years before the scandal broke.
Right. Swaggart had acted as the accuser against Marvin Gorman, a fellow minister within the Assemblies of God. He accused Gorman of having multiple affairs,
which led to Gorman being defrocked.
Yes, his ministry was nearly destroyed. And Swaggart had publicly denounced him, using his massive platform to enforce moral discipline.
And Gorman decided to return the favor.
With interest. He was determined to expose Swaggart as a hypocrite. The sources detail exactly how he did it. He hired his own son, Randy Gorman, and his son-in-law, Garland Bilbo, for a stakeout.
Their target was the Travel Inn on Airline Highway in Metairie, Louisiana.
And the surveillance was successful. They photographed Swaggart outside Room 7 with a local prostitute named Deborah Murphy. It was definitive proof of the very transgression Swaggart had condemned in others.
And Gorman used this evidence masterfully.
Oh, he did. He confronted Swaggart, and the demand was simple. Swaggart must publicly apologize for lying about Gorman's affairs, which was the basis of the defamation, and he had to work for Gorman's full reinstatement to the Assemblies of God ministry.
And if Swaggart complied,
Gorman would bury the photos.
That is a textbook case of leveraging moral failure for personal and professional reinstatement. It turned the crisis into a matter of institutional politics, not just personal sin.
But Swaggart stalled, didn't he?
He did. He failed to respond to the demand for nearly a year. Eventually, Gorman hand-delivered a note informing Swaggart that the deadline had passed.
When Swaggart still remained silent, Gorman went public. He exposed the assignation to the Assemblies of God leadership on February 16, 1988.
And the dam broke.
The dam broke, and the legal fallout was significant. Gorman successfully sued Swaggart for defamation and conspiracy to ruin his reputation.
He was initially awarded a massive amount, I think it was $10 million.
$10 million in 1991. But the sources confirm the matter was eventually settled for $1.75 million after an appeal. But still, that financial penalty represents the tangible cost of his original aggressive judgment against a fellow minister.
Now, before the famous confession, there was this interesting media sideshow involving Deborah Murphy.
Yes, she offered her story to the National Enquirer for $100,000.
And to vet the story, the tabloid had her take a polygraph test.
Administered by an NYPD expert, no less. And it concerned two key questions. Was she paid to set up Swaggart, or was she fabricating the story for cash? She failed the polygraph.
On both questions.
On both questions. And that fact is fascinating because it immediately injects this doubt into the narrative. It complicates whether the entire event was a pure setup or a purely fabricated story.
Though, as the sources note, Murphy's excuse was,
she attributed the failure to using cocaine the day before the test.
right. So the waters were muddied, but the outcome was certain. The National Enquirer didn't even run her story. They published a piece suggesting the Swaggart family feared he had contracted AIDS.
And Murphy eventually provided this extensive interview to Penthouse magazine, which just cemented this scandal in the public consciousness, both religious and secular.
Which brings us to the moment of maximum drama, the live televised confession on February 21st, 1988.
This was performance art built on genuine religious distress. It was pure theater. Swaggart appeared on stage, wept uncontrollably, and delivered that now iconic, tearful confession.
He spoke vaguely, though. He said he sinned against his Lord, but crucially, he never detailed the transgression or named the people he had harmed, including Gorman.
No. And his prayer asking for the precious blood to wash and cleanse every stain until it is in the seas of God's forgetfulness was deeply, deeply moving for his followers.
The institutional response from the Assemblies of God was immediate and complex, and we should be clear about their disciplinary procedure because the AOG is the largest Pentecostal denomination. They held immense authority over Swaggart.
The sources outline the process clearly. The National Presbytery ordered the standard consequence for sexual immorality for a minister, a 2-year suspension.
And this wasn't just punishment.
No, it was designed as a period of theological accountability, reflection, and restoration before being allowed back into ministry. They were insisting on his submission to institutional authority.
But Swaggart balked at that 2-year term. He probably saw it as a permanent career cancellation.
He rejected it entirely. He served a much shorter initial 3-month suspension that the district council had put in place, and then, believing that was sufficient, he returned to the pulpit long before the National Presbytery mandated.
And here's where the ultimate downfall occurred.
This is the key. The AOG hierarchy defrocked him. They permanently removed his ministerial license and credentials. It wasn't just about the sin anymore.
It was about the refusal to submit to the authority of the denomination.
It shifted from a question of morality to a question of obedience and institutional structure.
So Swaggart, stripped of his credentials by the world's largest Pentecostal organization, then became an independent, non-denominational minister.
Simply operating out of his existing family worship center. His decision to prioritize his platform over institutional accountability was the moment he severed ties with the organized church world.
You would think this career-ending event, the humiliation, the lawsuit, the defrocking, would be the end of the story.
You absolutely would.
But just 3 years later, in October 1991, we have the second scandal, which solidified his reputation for defiance.
And this one was dramatically different. It offers such a stark contrast to the tears of 1988.
So what happened?
On October 11, 1991, Swaggart was pulled over by a police officer in Indio, California, for a pretty mundane reason. He was driving on the wrong side of the road.
But the passenger in the car with him was Rosemary Garcia, a prostitute.
Yes. And Garcia later told reporters exactly why he stopped her. She said, quote, "He asked me for sex. I mean, that's why he stopped me. That's what I do. I'm a prostitute." The situation was transactional and undeniable.
It removed all the ambiguity of that 1988 polygraph issue.
Completely. And it's so striking that after all the dramatic weeping of 1988, Swaggart's response in 1991 wasn't just different, it was strategically defiant.
How did he address his congregation this time?
The emotional contrition was gone. Instead of another tearful public apology, Swaggart told his congregation without any apology, "The Lord told me it's flat, none of your business."
Wow.
He temporarily stepped down as head of the ministry, but only for a time of healing and counseling. maintaining complete personal control over his own recovery and schedule. He refused to submit to any external judgment.
The contrast is everything, isn't it? The first time, he wept and asked for forgiveness from the Lord, trying to save his career within the denomination.
The second time, he essentially told the public that his personal actions were private, declaring his absolute autonomy. And this fundamentally changed the nature of his ministry forever.
The dual scandals mark the definitive end of the Jimmy Swaggart empire as a mainstream televangelist force.
Absolutely. The sources state the ministry became significantly smaller and permanently non-affiliated, non-denominational. The empire had shrunk, but it had survived.
But the financial reckoning must have been brutal. Losing those distribution channels after 1991, that must have vaporized the core of that $150 million revenue stream.
It did. After the first scandal, he lost broadcast and merchandise rights, but after the second, local television stations canceled their contracts en masse. It permanently ended his career as a standard, syndicated televangelist.
And the devastating ripple effects hit his educational institution almost immediately after '88.
Right. The Jimmy Swaggart Bible College, JSBC, which was supposed to be the pipeline for future leaders, suffered a reported 72% drop in enrollment in the wake of that first scandal.
And that compounded existing accreditation issues.
It did. It was a huge institutional retraction, and it only worsened after the 1991 exposure. The college was renamed the World Evangelism Bible College in 1991, but enrollment dropped again to a mere 370 students.
The sources confirm they had to radically downsize.
Radically. Programs in music, physical education, secretarial science, communications were all shut down. The basketball team, a real symbol of a healthy college, was disbanded.
And professors were laid off.
3 Bible professors and an English professor were laid off in November of 1991. The educational dream just completely collapsed.
Yet, despite this massive financial and institutional collapse, Swaggart demonstrated this profound, almost singular focus on maintaining his media platform, regardless of outside approval.
He rebuilt his operations from the ground up, establishing Jimmy Swaggart Ministries at the Family Worship Center.
And crucially, he founded the SonLife Broadcasting Network, SBN. This, in many ways, is the ultimate expression of his rejection of external authority.
Exactly. SBN became his insurance policy against organizational oversight. By owning and operating his own 24/7 broadcasting network, he eliminated the need for external contracts, like the ones with TBN or local affiliates that had dropped him.
And SBN broadcasts globally today.
It does, ensuring that Swaggart and his subsequent ministerial family would always have an unchallenged platform.
That demand for autonomy was also applied to radio.
Yes, he launched SonLife Radio on the non-commercial FM band, which operated without selling time to external entities. The sources confirm it was commercial-free, featuring only in-house programming.
Mostly Southern gospel, right?
Primarily Southern gospel, with its flagship station, WJFM, anchoring the persistent broadcast effort right there in Baton Rouge.
So this model of vertical integration, owning the message, the platform, and the content delivery, it allowed the ministry to shrink its size.
Dramatically. But consolidate its power, absolutely. It maintained a core, dedicated audience who valued Swaggart's personal authority over any kind of institutional oversight.
And through all of this public drama, the sources confirm a deeply rooted personal consistency.
He remained married to Frances Anderson for over 70 years, right until his death.
And that stability allowed for a generational continuity that really secured the ministry's survival?
It did. The sources confirm that the ministry persisted through 4 generations, with his son, Donnie Swaggart, and his grandson, Gabriel Swaggart, stepping into key roles. This familial structure was strong enough to absorb the scandals and continue operating the Family Worship Center and SBN.
It's also necessary to clarify his political footprint, because while Swaggart was recognized as this massive figure in the rise of the Christian right, a figure who commanded immense national political attention, the sources state explicitly that he maintained no formal political affiliation.
He was influential, but officially unaffiliated. And that political neutrality, combined with his media consolidation, insulated him from the specific partisan shifts that might have eroded a ministry tied to a particular political party or faction.
His focus remained singular.
Control the gospel message and his means of broadcasting it.
We have to bring this incredible 90-year arc to its close. The sources report that on June 15, 2025, Jimmy Swaggart was hospitalized after suffering cardiac arrest at his home in Baton Rouge.
And his son, Donnie, offered a very candid statement to the public. He said that without a miracle, his time will be short.
Then came a final symbolic convergence of his 2 warring passions, faith And music.
A beautiful and strange full-circle moment.
Oh.
On June 30th, 2025, just one day before his death, Swaggart was formally inducted into the Southern Gospel Hall of Fame class of 2025.
It was a formal institutional recognition of the musical talent he had sought to suppress, or at least control, all those decades earlier.
Jimmy Swaggart died the following day, July 1st, 2025, in Baton Rouge at the age of 90. He ended a career that spanned the transition from the flatbed trailer to global satellite television, a life lived in the agonizing tension between sacred calling and secular temptations.
Jimmy Swaggart's story offers a vital case study in the high stakes of 1980s American mega ministries.
It really does. His career demonstrated the frightening speed at which media can build an empire, reaching 250 stations and $150 million annually.
Yet it also revealed the fragility of that empire, especially when faced with complex entanglements like the troubling Renamo controversy and the devastating effect of public moral failure on institutional trust.
We've thoroughly explored the core tension of his life, that early radical sacrifice required to turn down Sam Phillips and Son records for the pulpit.
Only to see his ministry become defined by the commercial success he achieved through gospel music, a Grammy nomination, millions of records sold, and then those two very public, dramatic falls from grace.
And it raises an important question for you, the listener. When personal scandal overtakes an entire ministry, when the traditional television networks drop you and your accreditation is stripped away, what actually survives?
In Swaggart's case, it wasn't the institutional church that survived. It was the dedicated Autonomous Broadcasting Network, SBN, which he built specifically to circumvent external control.
This brings us back to the heart of his organizational crisis. The Assemblies of God defrocked him for one reason. He refused to submit to their prescribed 2-year period of institutional authority after the first scandal.
Their decision was fundamentally about obedience, not just repentance.
And then, following the second fall, his public response was even more defiant. It's flat none of your business.
That transformation from the emotional public pleas of 1988 to the hardened, defiant autonomy of 1991, that's the key to understanding his long-term legacy.
It is. Having rejected institutional oversight, he was free to rebuild an empire accountable only to himself and his loyal family structure. And that enabled the ministry to transition into an independent network that broadcast globally right up until his death.
So we'll leave you with this final provocative thought to mull over. Swaggart was punished by the institutional church for prioritizing his personal authority over their organizational rules. Did that very insistence on maintaining absolute personal authority, even at the cost of his formal religious credentials, inadvertently enable the longevity and the resilience of his ministry?
In other words, by rejecting the gatekeepers, did he create a platform that ultimately only he could close?